One more thing with IMO4. IMO4 is not like IMO3 in one way. IMO3 takes time, right? That 24 hours to kind of heat up, and maybe it's going to take 36 hours, takes a little longer. Though ours heated up pretty fast, actually, which was surprising. Usually it takes a little longer, but IMO4 heats up quick. You have all that microbial life in that IMO3. So I describe IMO4, especially if you use fresh IMO3, like it hasn't cooled down for like a week, but we just use it like we start on Friday. Our IMO4 is going to be hot in hours. Okay, it's like jumping on a moving train. IMO3, it's like we're starting the train. We're loading the oven on the boiler on the train, and it's going chuk 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 chuk, and it's getting going until it gets up to like 100 miles an hour. IMO4, it's like the train's going by and you reach out and you grab the handle and you're on. It's just 100 miles an hour, day one, moment one, okay? So just beware that if you're checking it, that temperature is gonna start right away. IMO5 is like if the 100-mile-an-hour train was also a bucking bronco.
How long does IMO4 have to sit for?
Before using, you can use it while it's hot. You can put it straight on and it will be wonderful. You don't have to let it rest to use it. IMO4 plus a high nitrogen material. So manure or whatever you have, food scraps. Now you don't need this ratio of how much IMO4 to high N. You could use a very little amount of IMO4 to treat a bunch of high N. But all this microbes can cure that pretty fast. The thing is the more, if you don't do like more IMO and slightly less high N, but you do like 25% IMO and 75% high nitrogen material, that is going to want to be really, really hot. So you got to make a decision. Do I want to spread it really thin and try and keep it under 120 degrees to preserve all the microbes? Or I just want to make fertilizer? If you just want to make fertilizer, you can let it go hot, but it's going to want to be hot. It's going to try and go real hot. So if you want to try and keep it in that 120 degree range, you probably want to go 50-50, and then be careful with the water. Not too much water, keep it kind of dry, and you can process raw manure in a very short period of time with IMO because it goes so thoroughly through it and processes it with all that fungi, especially manure. If you're not using like food scraps and stuff, but also food scraps, all those fats and proteins that are in manure that bacteria have a long time or a hard time to break down, the fungus can break down right away. Fungus can deconstruct fatty acid chains and eat the lipids and leave behind acids. So IMO4 plus high N and our nutrients. IMO5 is just beware. You're going to have to decide if you're going to let it be 140 degrees or you want to keep it under temperature. If you're going to keep it under temperature, you got to be really careful with your water, pile height, etc. Okay? Yeah.
I've never tried IMO5 because in the text it said only do it when you have a certain amount, 300 pounds it said, and I've never made an IMO file for that big.
Only when you have 300 pounds.
And more. What should you, that's what the show text said, or maybe it was...
Lost in translation.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, the books are hard that way. No, you can have a little pile like that of manure and treat it with IMO4, and you can have a good IMO5 pile.
Great.
All right, so fermented mixed compost is kind of the same. Fermented mixed compost, you can bring IMO4 to bear with any sort of thing that raw material or resources on your farm that you want to process. And you can do this process bringing in those variables with anything. You can bring in more carbon, You can bring in crab meal. You can bring in crab shells. You can bring in raw fish guts, whatever. You can process and make kind of compost out of anything with IMO, and bring in green material, wood chips, etc. Just know that that composting those composting rules, those recipes, 1-1-1 or 70%, 30%, those kind of come to bear on whatever you make. So if you're gonna make something with a bunch of different stuff in it, all kind of balanced, like a third, a third, a third, you're gonna have to turn that all the time. If you want to make a fermented mixed compost with a bunch of stuff, but you're gonna bring in a bunch of wood chips, like 70%, you can make it with the IMO, leave it, and it'll process statically or without turning. So just know that there's a lot of ways to ferment and process raw materials into a good farm input. You're just gonna have to decide kind of how you want to run that as far as your time applied to making that. Okay? Any questions? 30 degrees. You'll smell the volatilization of your nitrogen. A lot of your nitrogen will just gas into the atmosphere. And so keeping things cooler, I maintain the nitrogen in my raw materials much better. I consider that a higher quality material. Not all compost, finished product, not all compost is equal, right? You ever gotten some amazing compost and some crappy compost? Use both. I mean, it's not all the same. So what makes those differences? And I would say that you will, if you play with these, you will know what makes those differences, what you like, etc. Okie dokie.
I have a question
Yeah.
about versus IMO4 versus IMO5. Like when they're working here on the farm,
Yeah.
when would they want to use one or the other?
Great question. Wonderful question. So IMO5 is really what we want to be using at the beginning of the season or before planting. So taking your IMO4 and taking all your pig manure, stockpiling all your chicken manure, and taking all that material, all that high nitrogen plant food, and making a quality batch or a big batch of IMO5, and then treating your field, your plateaus in the collo or your dryland collo before planting, like a week before planting, ideally a week before planting, even your IMO4 if you're not making IMO5, 1 week before planting. But if you can mix up and kind of ferment or make IMO5 out of all kinds of high nitrogen material and apply it before planting, you really don't need to feed your plants throughout their growing cycle. You're getting all those nitrogen, all those microbes in there, and then you can preload all your nitrogen in a way that it gets incorporated in your soil structure. It's not just manure sitting on the top, gonna volatilize and you're gonna lose some of it. You'll see a great benefit. You can also top dress with IMO5 in the growing cycle, as long as it's finished and processed IMO5. It's a great solid material to be adding in the process.
How long does it take for the IMO5 to be processed?
Really just a week. You can process high nitrogen material because you have so much of the microbial life, you can process it in a week. It's the same thing when it cools down. Yeah, good question. Yeah, IMO5, if you start treating pre-planting with IMO5, you'll see you have very little to do in the growing cycle of a annual crop. There is not a whole lot more that you need to be feeding or tending to. You're not dealing with the pest, the diseases. It gets pretty simple.
And it would sustain like taro for 1 year?
Taro is a full year crop.
Yeah.
Yeah, it depends on your application rate. Let's talk application rates. So we apply IMO4 at 330 pounds per 1/4 acre. Totally cycling soil that is cycling nutrients, the wheel underground that processes sand, silt, and clay into minor minerals, takes your water nitrogen or your atmospheric nitrogen and actually puts it into your soil structure and system. That kind of soil sustains plants incredibly well as far as food. There's much less need for fertilizer. So the answer to that question is difficult. How alive is your soil? What condition is your soil in? But yeah, at minimum, your IMO5 for really feeding for the year, minimum would be this application rate. But if you want to push yields, you have good finished IMO5, you can double or triple this application rate for a preloading of nutrients. But what you don't want to do is try to triple this application rate with poor quality or unfinished high nitrogen material. You don't want to just add manure at 3 times this rate. You want IMO5 that finished properly, where your IMO4 went and conditioned or processed those fats and proteins in that high nitrogen material. Then that's going to be good to apply liberally. But if you apply raw manure liberally, you're going to get problems. But yeah, I mean, there is a good bit of crops plain with that a pre-application of IMO5 is really all they do as far as feeding. But you also have those foliar feeds that we talked about that you can bring to bear on during your growing time, or drench feeds. So you do have tools and that's really how we farm in natural farming, is with observation.